hand over to Paul Lenz, who is the Trust Executive of the Indigo Trust. And Paul, you're going to speak to us about the Community Justice Fund.
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much, Jim. Just to give you a little bit of background on the Community Justice Fund, it's a fund that was created in March of last year with the specific aim of funding specialist legal advice. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with specialist legal advice, you may think, well, that's the driest, most tedious thing in the world. But trust me, it is absolutely critical to our society. What these organizations, legal advice centers, citizens advice bureaus, and others do is support people who have problems with housing, homelessness, employment, critically welfare benefits, asylum, abuse, and they simply have no means of redress without someone who understands the law who can help them and walk them through the process. Now, with COVID-19 hitting, it was a perfect storm for the sector. A massive increase for the demand of the services of these organisations, whilst at the same time a significant drop in the funding and also much harder for them to physically operate. Very quickly, the Access to Justice Foundation and the Legal Education Foundation, and it's great to see Claire from ATJ here on the call today, got together a group of funders, basically with the principle that it doesn't make sense for us to be working on this separately, but to be giving out individual grants. We can be much more effective if we come together as a group. And so really over the course of a couple of weeks, we formed a pooled fund called the Community Justice Fund. And we're in the process of completing our second wave of grants, by the end of which we'll have given out about £15 million to 179 different organisations. I'm going to reflect on what I think the benefits of this grouping have been, and aligned with that, the tips that I believe have made it really effective. I think the first thing is to make it so simple for the applicants. We have a single one-stop shop place where they can apply with a form and application requirements that are as simple as possible for the grantees. By bringing together our funds into a single pool rather than having the applicants having to send off multiple applications to multiple different organisations in totally different formats, we've hopefully made it a lot easier for the sector. The next thing is, by acting as a pool, we can act much more strategically, rather than just me looking at applications and having no sense of what other funders are doing, where they're working geographically. It means that we can hopefully be more fair and just in the funding that we're giving, particularly in terms of geographic spread. It means that we don't simply give funds to the really well-known organisations who are good at fundraising and are well networked. And the tip for that succeeding is, and this can be pretty hard, you've got to be completely comfortable about giving up your individual agency when you participate in a fund like this. You will be collaborating, you will be part of the decision-making process, but you will no longer hold that sole decision-making process that you or your trustees have had in the past. And that can be super difficult for some organisations. Some trustees may go, well, I don't want to just be giving away this money for somebody else to make decisions on. Where's the accountability there? As a grant making, you may think, well, it's my job to make these decisions. Why am I delegating it to a group of other people? Trust me, you need to do it because everything will be better if you do. Another thing that we've learned is that we are much stronger together than we are separately. And I think this has a twofold factor to it. One is that as a group, we can more effectively approach organisations like the Ministry of Justice and the National Lottery to get more funds for the sector. We can speak with a single voice. We can share our knowledge and experience to make stronger cases. As an aside to that, something that we've started doing over the last couple of months is realising, well, actually, we shouldn't just be an organisation that funds. We can do so much more. Initially, I think we thought the Community Justice Fund was going to be something that was relatively short-lived. We'd get some money, we'd give it out, the world would go back to normal for some value of normal, and things would be good, or as good as they had been before. We've now seen that as a group together, we can take a much more active role in terms of policy advocacy and research. Something we're doing at the moment is funding a piece of economic research, because we know instinctively how valuable this sector is to society, but there's very little evidence for it. As a group, it's much easier to fund the kind of research that needs to be done, than we would have been able to as individual organisations. It's much harder to go to your trustees and say, I'd like you to write a cheque for £30,000 for a piece of economic research than it is for us to all be putting into that and supporting it together. Fundamentally, the reason that I think this fund has worked so well is due to the strength of the relationships that we formed between the individuals and organisations that have been part of it. Critically, on the steering group, we have representatives from practitioners from all parts of the UK and from the umbrella bodies. We know that we can't just be funders acting in a vacuum. And also, we've had to get to know each other, and we've had to do this via Zoom. And I haven't met Claire. I've probably spoken to Claire more than any of my friends over the last 18 months, never actually met her in person. And that takes a lot of time and investment. When we started out, it may seem crazy, but we were having calls every single day. We're now having calls once or twice a week. But I think that relationship building and generating that trust between the individuals is absolutely key. Sorry, I've probably talked well over my 5 minutes. Something else as a relative newcomer to this sector is, again, acknowledging my ignorance and being able to draw upon the knowledge and experience of my peers. They're people who've been working in this field for decades longer than I have. And it's been so valuable for me to learn from them, and also to not be afraid of holding up my hand saying, well, I just don't know about this organization or this topic area. And having the ability for someone with greater expertise to both inform me and inform the decisions that we take. And finally, I think it is making sure that everyone is agreed on the principles that you're following. It was mentioned in the first presentation. And when it comes to awarding grants, agreeing upon the criteria and the assessments that we use is absolutely fundamental from the outset. We go through what might seem to some a very laborious process of looking at every single grant, both individually and en masse, looking at the assessments for various criteria and discussing it and making the judgments. That's key for the grants to be fair. But fundamentally, before you get to that point, you have to make sure that everyone is aligned on the overall strategic objectives and the overall means of assessing those criteria. I could keep on going for ages, but I will cut it off there, other than to say, obviously, if you care about homelessness, employment, welfare, immigration, and you don't currently fund specialist legal advice, then we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Paul. And to all our speakers, I've found it absolutely fascinating to hear such different perspectives on different experiences, but also quite a degree of commonality between some of the experience and the kind of top tips you've drawn out of